Yes, indeed, this pandemic or this crisis, of course, is unprecedented. It's still evolving, I may add, and the impact is also still evolving. If you recall, we started off with predictions of $1 trillion worth of erosion of global GDP. This was by the IMF. Supposedly, the institutions which have a finger on the pulse of world economy, and they were so out in their predictions. And it then rose to 2 billion, and then 4 trillion, and then 6 trillion. Today it's close to 10 trillion is the estimated erosion of global GDP. That's about 9 or 10% of the global GDP. IMF also qualifies their predictions with saying that this might actually be a very rosy picture and very optimistic, and the real scenario may actually be worse than that. So yeah, it's unprecedented. In terms of your question on the impact, so I mean, like I said, it's still evolving, so we're not really sure what the final impact is going to be. But one thing is for certain, that this is not an impact on a segment of the economy, on a sector of the economy, or on a particular country or even continent. It's a global crisis and impacts the world economy globally. And various parts of the economy are obviously going to be impacted in different ways. One of the evident impacts is on the health sector. We've seen that evolve in many countries, and I don't think any country has actually been able to match the resources needed in the healthcare sector with the size of the crisis, and everyone has been struggling, and everyone has been surprised with the USA's response. Supposedly the most, the country with the most advanced healthcare system. We can see it unfolding in front of our eyes. Aviation, tourism, I mean, these are some of the segments which are very evident in terms of their, being affected tremendously, or having a big impact in terms of their growth, in terms of their prospects, in terms of their ability to sustain, their business model. But like you said earlier on, the most impacted are the small and medium enterprises, of course. Even in the best of circumstances, SMEs are always struggling to survive. And that is because of the ecosystem around them, and because of their ability to reach out to formal institutions for financial and banking services, for example, or even for advisory services, or even their ability to reach out to expand their markets, especially if they're export markets. So as it is, SMEs are at a disadvantage. And in a crisis like the one we're facing today, they are even in more of a situation which has a big impact on their ability to sustain the business. We must also understand that within the SME sector, you have different types of businesses. So you have the startups, you have the scale-ups, and you have the businesses which are running, which are ongoing, the restaurants, the grocery stores, the kiosks, the small manufacturers. So they are in turn being affected also very differently. Obviously, startups which are just starting out, depending on what stage they are at, have they acquired the financing that they need, or are they still looking for it? So depending on that, it's a fact of life. A lot of these businesses will fall by the wayside. They will not have the ability to sustain, and especially now that we know, after 4 months being into this pandemic, that it's not a short-term thing. I mean, it's actually, the end is not even in sight yet. And the only benchmark we have is that when there's a vaccination, and vaccination is, of course, months away from being offered to remedy this situation. So a lot of businesses, unfortunately, will not survive, and that's something we need to understand. But those who have the ability to withstand that, what is it that they need to do? And we also know that almost all governments, I think in all countries of the world, governments and central banks have offered relief packages to businesses and also to small and medium enterprises. So a large chunk of these packages, somewhere even 50, 60, 80% of them are geared towards SMEs, And these range from relaxation in loan repayment terms, moratorium on loan repayments, relaxation in paying utility bills, in paying rental for the premises, in support for paying wages of their employees. So there are different types of. But the issue actually I have, and something I have been saying for at least more than a month now when these relief packages were announced, and I think now that we are 2 months, 3 months into it, we also now see this evident. It's evident now. But what I was saying is that, look, you have all these relief packages, but we also need to provide the SMEs the ability to be able to decide what type of package do they need. Which of these different packages that are being offered is suitable for that particular SME. It's like an SME in normal circumstances. They need a lot of hand-holding in determining how they should structure the way their business is organized, how they should approach a financial institution, what type of banking or financial facilities do they need. They need guidance in this. They're not able to decide it on their own. And obviously we know that this depends on the type of business, on the type of product, on the type of market that they're targeting. So similarly, for assessing these relief packages, there's not been any awareness creation among the SMEs how they can approach or how can they access this. And it's become very evident in the USA now, where banks, and in most jurisdictions, even in where I am right now, in Dubai, the banks were tasked, or they were the conduits for routing or channelizing this funding for on lending or assisting the SMEs. But the SMEs are at a loss to understand how they can go to a bank. So most of these banks have ended up exhausting probably up to 60% in Dubai and even in the US, I think, of this funding to providing relief to the bigger of the SMEs, the medium, the upper medium. So the small business has still not been able to access any of this relief package, and they are the ones who need it the most. So what small businesses should do on their own right now is have an assessment of their cash flows. So how has this crisis, how is the fact that the restaurant that they were running is no more running? How is the fact that this small tourism-based business that they were running is obviously out of business? So are there receivables which this company or this restaurant needed? Or are there any payables that they still have on their books? So they need to assess under these circumstances what the cash flow looks like today and what it looks like over the next 5, 6, 10 months. And based on that, is it because the receivables that were owed to them by a buyer will not be forthcoming because the buyer himself or herself is in a fix in terms of their ability to generate revenue for themselves. In that case, is there a relief package available through a bank which can discount? They have these receivables. Can it be discounted? Is there a relief package? They are. So is that the one they need? Or is it that the restaurant that I was running, I still have some clients coming in, or maybe a grocery store, maybe not a restaurant, but a grocery store. But I need to pay rent to my landlord, and I'm not able to do that because my business has gone down. So is there a relief package available where I can offer something to my landlord, or he can defer my payment because the landlord is able to access some funding? So these are the type of things that they need to start thinking about. And also another differentiation between SMEs is there are SMEs which have a banking relationship, and there are SMEs which don't have. A majority of them don't have, but there are a lot of SMEs which have a banking relationship. So the first port of call for such SMEs should be their bank. And they should sit down with their bank and have the banker explain to them how the bank can assist given all these funds that they now have because of central bank interventions, the government's interventions, and the fact that they themselves have lower reserve requirements, so their liquidity. So banks have a lot of liquidity right now globally because of all these measures, but they need to be targeted to the businesses which are the engine of economic growth, and these are the small businesses. And unless and until these banks are able to reach out themselves, and the SMEs also try to get a better understanding of which part of this relief package is it that they need. I think this is something which has been lacking, and we need to start focusing on that. Yeah, your question about going forward. So what I see happening, or maybe it's not easy to forecast anything. What I would like to see happening, because of what has happened and the experience that big corporates have also gone through, having seen their supply chains being disrupted, is that a lot of or more focus would be on these supply chains going forward. Because without these supply chains, and these supply chains are small and medium enterprises, they're small enterprises which are providing ingredients to a pharmaceutical factory, which are providing or collecting milk and providing it to Nestle, which are making some chemicals so that Procter & Gamble can make their toothpaste and their soaps. So these types of supply chains, because of their being small enterprises, small businesses, have been disrupted themselves, because the premises they are renting, they're not able to pay, they're not able to pay for the utilities. So the larger corporate should be focusing on these supply chains, how they can be strengthened in terms of their sustainability, to continue providing Nestle's of this world and Procter & Gamble's of this world with the necessary services and raw material and products for these large corporates to be sustainable themselves. So a lot of emphasis on sustainability. So hopefully with this, the ecosystem, which almost all governments have been at least saying, in some cases also building the ecosystem around small and medium enterprises. So that needs to be expedited. Small and medium enterprises need to be able to access not only banking and financial services, but also non-financial services and markets, so that they can expand, strengthen, and sustain their ability to continue doing business. As for, again, coming back to startups, scale-ups, perhaps also this is what they should be doing. Scale-ups are companies which obviously have reached a certain level, and now they were looking at leveraging others so that they can reach out to a larger market or to more clientele. For example, if it's a fintech, they need to leverage with the bank. If it's in healthcare, they need to leverage maybe a hospital. So how is that going to happen? What is it that they need? So they need to replan and take a look at their strategy and re-strategize. And maybe in terms of their business model or even their product, they might have to pivot. So if it was, let's say, a small enterprise manufacturing chemicals, so they can quickly pivot, and we've seen actually that happening into producing hand sanitizers. If it's a small garment manufacturer who is working for a big textile, so a lot of them have pivoted, and this is what small businesses are able to do. They're agile and they can switch. So garment manufacturers have pivoted to making masks, for example, or even protective clothing. And you and I know a lot of such enterprises which have done that. So these are some of the ways that you can mitigate the risk. Again, like I said, it is still evolving. I mean, we don't really know what the total effect is going to be at the end of the day. At this stage, at this point in time, we know that there are certain relief packages available. Again, I'm just talking in the context of SMEs. We need to position ourselves to be able to understand what these are and how we can benefit from them given our business model, given our product. So number one. Number two, make sure that we have a very good understanding of our cash flows for the next 6 or 7 months. Where is it coming from, or where is it not coming from, and how can we ensure that we do get some sort of cash flow coming in, either from these relief packages to tide the business over for the next, at least in the short term, 3 months or 4 months. And also, is it any way, given our product, let's say if it's a manufacturing enterprise, is it any way we can pivot into a sector which is in demand right now? So like grocery stores, and they're pivoted into online. A lot of these theaters and museums, as we know, have also started giving virtual tours. So how do you pivot into something which can sustain what you're offering, but perhaps using technology, leveraging technology? And I think that brings me to the next point, that small and medium enterprises themselves need to now start focusing on, especially if you're talking about pivoting and you're talking about reaching out to more clients. So how can small and medium enterprises leverage technology? Again, this is an area where I've been working for many, many years now. And the SMEs obviously are, they think that they are so small that they're not able to leverage technology. They're not able to digitalize their processes. And they don't need to. What small and medium enterprises need to do is leverage platforms which are offering services to SMEs. And there are a lot of platforms now in 2020, they have evolved over the last 3, 4, 5 years, which are platforms as a service. So they can leverage technology to reach out to clients, they can leverage technologies to access markets, they can, without digitalizing their own processes and procedures. Some of them they may need to, so they need to look at that. Again, it depends on what part of what area or segment of the SME the business is in. But a lot of platforms are available for them to leverage, and they should start thinking about it. I think there are many lessons to be learned from this crisis. And the lessons are for everyone. I mean, that is, I don't know what word to use. Maybe it's not a good word, but the benefit or the advantage of this crisis, I mean, there's not many advantages, obviously, is that it has got people to think of different ways of doing things. They've got to think that perhaps we should have stepped back and given a chance for our own business to become sustainable instead of ravaging the environment as we have been doing. And as a result of that, our ecosystem has been unbalanced. And already you've got the figures now. Every day we get these figures. So I think carbon emissions are already down by 10% in these 4 or 5 months. I was reading yesterday that the hole in the ozone layer has been closed in these 4 months. So the Earth itself is healing as well. And I think it's time for humans and businesses to also heal themselves, but then emerge not as the previous selves, but different, so that it's not only about the business, it's more about the sustainability of the environment in which that business is taking place. So, I mean, let me just leave it here, and of course, if there are any other questions, I will be very happy to address them.